and it was just staring right at me. And I was like, well, I guess I need to try growing lion's manes too, because I've heard they contribute to neurogenesis and it's a medicinal mushroom. What's going on with this? So I ordered lion's mane spawn as well. And so I'm doing lion's mane and shiitake at my small homestead production, basically, which is like about 40 pieces of wood, which is equivalent of like maybe 5 trees. So my kind of take on, so I made a video of my workshop, so I'll go ahead and play that. But my take on the whole thing is coming from a sustainability of, we've got trees that are already slated for demolition. If you talk to foresters, that's what they do. They go in and they clear, scrub trees to improve the big old trees that are already on the land so that you get good logs. And so they already routinely have to go in and cut down small trees that aren't going to produce high quality lumber. And so, but it's good wood and a mushroom is going to turn that into food. So this is my little video I put together. Can you guys see this?
Not yet.
Oh, okay. Let me see.
Share screen at the bottom.
We've got a lot of stuff on top of each other. All right, here we go. Sorry. Let's do this.
And you're gonna, if you want them to hear, you have to share the sound too.
Okay. Okay, can you see this?
Yep.
Oh no, I undid it. Sorry. Okay. So this is just my little workshop. We did it in our driveway. I'm trying to show that it's totally doable using not too expensive of equipment. Just a drill. You do have to buy the wax and the spawn, but that comes out to about maybe $50 for what we did in this video.
So you realize we're not watching that?
You don't see it yet?
No, so take it back to the beginning, share your screen, and then press play after we tell you that we can see it. Okay, we see that. Now we see that.
Okay. All right, this should work. So not a very big tree.
How many holes are you guys putting in one? So this is a wax that's actually somewhat pliable at room temperature, which I just found out about and I used it in this process. Some people use cheese wax, which needs to be melted, and so it's hot. This has mineral oil infused, and it's a product that you can buy from mushroom spawn distributors. But as you can see, it goes on,
pliable at room temperature. This is actually a chilly day. We're wearing winter coats out there. We made our own aluminum tags using construction materials and embossing tools. This is aluminum. We used aluminum so that it wouldn't rust, and aluminum nail to nail it to the log. Aluminum nail. That was pretty much the whole thing. That's the whole process down condensed into just a 3-minute video there.
How many holes are you putting in each log?
So the holes that was lion's mane. So you do a hole every 3 inches, and then turn the log 2 inches, and then do it on an offset. So you get a diamond pattern, or a zigzag of holes. Each hole has, you know, maybe 2 inches or 3 inches, between 1.5 inches and 2 inches around it. Other strains of fungus are going to tell you to do a little bigger pattern. Shiitake, they do on a wider pattern. And I think that with experience and with proper handling, you can be more efficient than what they kind of instruct you to do.
So you're just doing this for yourself, you're doing it for selling. So if somebody was just doing it for themselves and they just like wanted to find a log in their backyard and grow it for their family, I think you might have a different production strategy. So would you still need to have the wax? And I mean, what is the wax?
The main thing the wax does is it keeps your spawn dry. I mean, it keeps it from drying out. It keeps it wet, like right when you put it in the log. So when you put it in the log, it's kind of a weak spot for moisture to wick out. It'll dry out pretty rapidly. So the moisture cap, that wax cap, gives it, it doesn't let the moisture escape.
Okay, so then the mushrooms actually grow up around the wax?
Good question.
Through the wax. So, right?
Eventually the wax becomes kind of, it rubs away and it's not really there anymore. So really the first part is that once the spawn gets into the log, then there's about a 6-month incubation phase where the spawn colonizes 100% of the log. And that's called the spawn run. So you won't see any fungus during the spawn run because the fungus is still growing the mycelium. Once the mycelium kind of gets, I don't know the biology of it, but once it gets a feedback signal of I've filled the log, that's what it knows how to do. Once it does that, then it waits for the temperature to be right and the moisture, and then it will produce the fruiting body, which is what is the sexual organ, or it's asexual, but that is the fruit that will produce the spore, which blows in the wind and goes to the next log in nature. And so we're controlling that process by inoculating logs and then waxing them. The wax also keeps out foreign contaminants, foreign mold, or really local mold, but so it does too, but mainly it's to keep it from drying out right away.
Yeah, thanks. That makes sense.
And it's important too, I think, if you're going through all the effort of buying mushroom spawn, buying wax, the biggest part is the labor of drilling holes, hammering dowels, and then waxing them, and then handling the logs. So if you're putting all all the manual labor into that, then it doesn't take much more to make sure that you're using a fresh log that hasn't had time to be contaminated by another fungus. So they say to cut a tree and to use it within like a month, or sometimes within 2 weeks.
So if you were to do this in, say, your garage in Missouri, my garage gets really hot, and I'm sure other people's garages do too. Is that what's your? Can you talk about temperature?
Sure. So the way that my friend Claire does it is she does them just outside, like on her, like in her lawn. There's several oak little pieces. It looks like firewood, but if you look closely, they've been drilled and plugged and waxed. You know, it looks kind of interesting. There's something that's been happening with these. And then she just has them laying along her path. And then when they're younger, you put them on plastic or something to keep them out of the risk of being contaminated by other fungi. But once they're an older colonized log, it's kind of like the mushroom already dominates that log, and it's actually hard for other mushrooms to colonize it. It kind of becomes a self-sustaining, self-protecting colony is what it is. And then you don't have to protect it as much, but I've heard from other people saying that black mold ate their shiitake logs. I've heard that from other people, that the native black mold will eventually take over the log. So you want to keep them up off of the ground so that they're away from other ground fungi or slime. But also the big key is moisture. So a lot of productions also do have the log in contact with moist soil. That way the log, or really the fungus, can suck moisture up through the ground. But that's only after the spawn run has happened. So after like the first year, the log becomes much more resilient to infection. But in Missouri, we have a lot of wild fungus. We're really a wet, humid place. So you're asking about temperature. So Claire does it outside, and basically it's a lot like gardening. You'll see that you're a lot more productive in the spring and in the fall, and that the summer heat tends to impact the fungus a lot, and it doesn't want to be productive. Part of it's the moisture problem, like they'll dry out, but also temperature. But what's really cool is that in cultivated mushrooms, now there's quite a bit of information out there of which strains prefer which temperatures. So the big farmers, they are growing indoor in a climate controlled situation to where it's always 60 degrees, or it's always a good temperature. And actually I was just reading about the history of the portobello mushroom. It was first cultivated in France in the 1700s. Some guy realized that if you take the horse, they ate the mushrooms off of horse poop. Everyone knew that you could eat these mushrooms off of horse manure. That was like a thing. And so some guy realized, like, hey, I can take the mushroom growing off of this horse manure and I can put it into a bigger pile of horse manure compost, and then I get a big pile of mushrooms. And then someone else discovered, hey, if we do it in a cave, then the temperature is more consistent year round. Caves are going to stay about 55, maybe 57 degrees year round. So that's kind of how it started. That was the first indoor production, was in the 1700s under Louis XIV. So I know that that's kind of the origin, it was in caves, using horse manure compost. That was the portobello. And so indoor farmers right now are doing it indoor. That's who's really like producing a lot of the mushrooms that we eat at the grocery store. But in a homestead, I think it's totally viable to do it outdoors and to consider it like a seasonal crop. And they go dormant, and it's like that's what the native stuff does. And so you can buy cold range shiitake. You can also buy warm range shiitake, and then there's wide range shiitake, and there's a lot of varieties now for different climates. I think that for a homestead, if you're trying to be self-sufficient, the best thing would be to get more than one strain, because they'll behave differently at different temperatures. And that's what I'm going to be doing, is more outdoor stuff. Like have a bunch of logs outside that I water them occasionally, water them kind of like plants. And I'm still kind of new to it, honestly. I haven't really had enough failures to tell you what to avoid yet. But I'm gonna, there's different methodologies for coming at it from a commercial standpoint of how to achieve a weekly harvest so that you have food every week of the year. And that basically involves bringing some of your outdoor logs inside into a climate controlled room for part of the year. They take about 3 weeks to do a fruiting cycle, and then they need a couple months of rest after that. So you can put them in rotation. And so in a garage, you could have like the wall of your garage, you got 10 logs standing up against the wall. That would produce a lot of mushrooms if they were healthy and stuff. And then you could have like 20 logs outside that lay outside, and those are going to pop off in the spring naturally, so to speak. And then you could force the program to produce you some mushrooms like in the middle of January. So that's what I'm going to try to do. I'm going to try to have like maybe 50 logs outside, and then bring 1 or 2 in on a rotation to try to figure out how to have mushrooms during the winter.
Do you know what how many pounds you're gonna get from one log, or
what I do, I'm gonna basically, you saw I was labeling each log. So a big part of this for me is measuring what I'm doing. So I don't have a prediction really on what I'm gonna get, but a couple pounds per log per year, I think is a conservative estimate.
Matthew, do you have any experience with mushrooms? Nope. Hannah's not here yet, and she does have experience with this type of thing and could probably spout a bunch of numbers to us, but she usually nurses her baby right now that's going to bed at this time, so she might be delayed a little bit on getting on here. I think she was planning on 7:30, and we're getting right to that point, so maybe she can answer some of those questions here in a minute.
I also have to dry them and freeze them both too when they have excess, when they're really producing. And Alice has given me ones out of the freezer, that I've used in soups and stuff, and they were great. So when the abundance, it's kind of like the gardening. When the abundance is good, you dry them.
And there's a guy named Alan Judy who sells mushrooms at the Columbia Farmers Market. He's really the guru, I think, around here. And he's growing reishis and lion's manes, and a pound of lion, or a half pound, I buy a half pound at the farmers market, and it's like this much. It's like more than you can eat. So a pound of fungus wet, wet weight is different than dry weight, but that's actually a lot of food, really. Like, because also something else, and this is kind of like just this is more on the personal homestead side of things, but you don't want to grow so much of something that you get sick of it, so part of it is like you want to produce more than you need, but also diversity is so important. So I would rather have 10 logs of 10 different funguses than one log, or than 10 logs of one. But economically, the economy of scale it was a lot cheaper for me to make like 100 logs of lion's mane first, because I can buy it at a bulk, or you get a discount then, and also you're not changing your you're not having to wash your supplies like every hour of your production, because you do have to think about contamination. You don't want to get lion's mane into your shiitake spawn and whatnot, because there's probably things that do matter and things that don't matter, but I don't know any of the I haven't made these fails yet, so I'm trying to keep it clean and as sterile as possible.
But then, want to talk a little bit about the workshop coming up? Are there still spots available, or is it full?
Well, so I decided to do a workshop coming up, and it's kind of full. It's also kind of available. We imposed a cap on it because of COVID, and also because we didn't expect there to be a ton of people, but then we had about 20 people say that they wanted to come. over a course of 2 days. And so when that happened, we were like, we should probably cap this at like 10 people per day. But if there's anyone here that's interested in coming, we can make an exception for the sustainability crew. But
that is with Claire Descharme, right?
yeah, and that's down near Ashland, Missouri. And basically, we're just going to be making logs, kind of similar to that video you just watched. One thing I wanted to just mention is that so I was doing dowel spawn, which is like you hammer them into the log. So that's one way you can do it. There's also sawdust spawn, which I have a little video of Paul Weber showing us how to do that. And Paul Weber owns Three Creeks Farm, which is a small farm in Ashland, Missouri. And he was doing it with sawdust. So I can play that video here. Very similar, but it's a little faster.
Not in person.
Oh, we can't see your screen yet.
Palm style.
Hey, Mar, we can't see your
They all work
screen.
the same, right?
Sorry, say that again?
We can't see your screen.
Oh, sorry.
This one is designed.
Oops.
There we go.
And it's got a little bit of a heavier spring, so it's more resistance on it. You just like that. Whereas this one is a lighter spring. It's made to be one-handed. But it's a little bit of a reach with the thumb, anyways. So it's like. It goes pretty quick, really.
So this is sawdust that's inoculated with, this is shiitake, I guess. But you buy basically like a pound of this sawdust, and one bag of it can do 40 logs, I think. So that's a lot of logs. That's like a trailer full of logs. That would be enough for, a family to have sustainable production, I think. So it's a simple tool, but it does its job. It's a Japanese invention, I think. So yeah, it's just more of that. So yep.
You mean he does that for 4 minutes?
Yeah, well, yeah, that's what that video is.
Does he plug those with wax? Because
Right. Yes, I do have a video of him showing him doing it with wax, and I was using mineral oil infused cheese wax, which is pliable, and I was told to get that for doing this, and it's kind of a newer technology, so maybe it doesn't even work. I don't know. I haven't made that mistake yet.
Well, I guess I was wondering about the medium falling out of the holes when you turned it.
Oh no, it's moist when you do it, so it kind of retains its, and you're kind of packing it in there. It's kind of stamping it in there, and it's also there's a living kind of, it's got mycelium in it too, so it's kind of like
Fungi.
there's fungus nature to that already.
Suddenly we can't hear you, Mar.
They were using a crock pot, so, and a paintbrush. See how they just simply apply the wax while it's melted to the log. You seeing that?
Anybody else have any questions about that? So, Claire Ducharme is kind of a mushroom guru in Colombia, right? And so people have been asking her to do a workshop for a long time. And so it's a good workshop if you guys can get in on it.
I have a question for your shiitake logs or your lion's mane logs.
Mhm.
How much shade do they require?
Good question. Generally, if we're talking about outdoors, they want to be in the shade, like really, like full tree canopy shade. That's where I've seen them in the wild. It was fully it was down in a creek valley under a full oak tree canopy.
Okay.
Indoors, I heard Alan and Judy talking about indoor lighting, and he said one of his early mistakes he made was that when he built the workshop, he had just tons of light, and he didn't really think about it. He's like, I want lots of light, and when he measured it, it was like 4 times the sun light when he actually went in there and measured how much light he had, because he was having a problem not fruiting. So then he took out a lot of the light, and basically I'm doing right now, they're sitting under my deck in basically what you would call total shade, I think, in an outdoor environment, which is really like dappled sun, sunlight hits it occasionally.
My other question, how like we're thinking about putting some mushroom logs at the agriculture park, which is kind of CCUA's new headquarters, and it's in a full shade area. It's near to a little creek. How often do you think we should plan on watering it?
So that seems to be like the biggest factor with cultivation, is making sure that they don't dry out. And every site is so unique that it's really hard to prescribe like a watering schedule. Because even in the same site, you could have microclimates that would result in like a mushroom log drying out versus one 10 feet away is perfect. So I think it's something that people do is once the log has done its spawn run, they keep it stacked kind of incubation mode for a while until the thing is inoculated. And then that requires you need to water it occasionally in that stage or soak them. And then once they are fully colonized, I think in Japan, they stack them into the hill kind of, and they're in contact with the soil. They're actually touching the soil, and that is so that they can self-water, so that the fungus can pull moisture up. But I know that if you're using if you're trying to do shiitake here, it's not native here. So you're introducing competition by doing that. That's not to say it wouldn't work. Maybe there's different techniques that haven't quite been documented yet, where you use a bed of sand and then the log, to keep contamination out. There's not really a nailed down answer. Kind of like there's different ways to stack logs that keeps moisture in them longer. So like if you stack them all side by side like this, and then stack more on top of that, that's like fully enclosed mode. And that's too enclosed, usually you'll have a mold problem. Then there's like the stacking where they're like 2 and then 2, like a log cabin, and you're building it up. That lets like half of the moisture, there's airflow then, but then how often are you going to walk in and soak them? So there's so much variability in it that it's extremely hard to say. But I do know that you need to retain about 70% moisture in the log, otherwise it will be hurting for water. It will be struggling.
When you go out in the forest, and you see exactly when a whole bunch of mushrooms have come up. It's always when there's been like a lot of rain and it's a certain temperature. And
Mhm.
so it's well, a lot of rain, but it's not still raining, you know. I mean, and so like if you see places where there's a lot of mushrooms, it's like when they're everything is really moist, you know. It's
Mhm. Yeah,
and
we
so-
consider it like too wet. Like the
Right.
environment that they really grow in is like when it's almost too wet to walk outside. But we can control that by doing the soaking method, where you take the log and put it in the bathtub for 24 hours and then take it out and then set it down again. Now just the log is wet. You know, you didn't, the whole lawn isn't wet. So that's one way of, that's the way they kind of recommend to do it, is you soak your logs.
How
And
how do
that
you
kind of,
know it?
sorry, say
Is
it
there,
again?
how do you do this? How do you know the log is 70%? Like, is there a way to test for that? Is there a
There is.
tool?
There is. So there's two, I mean, there's a couple like high tech tools, like a hydrometer that's, so indoors you can do it pretty easily using just a hydrometer. If the room is
Mhm.
always 70%, then your logs are going to temper to that
Right.
humidity. And that's what
Moisture, yeah.
indoor you're doing it that way with Paul Allen said to use the ultrasonic humidifier instead of a conventional humidifier. He said that ultrasonic humidifiers are by far superior because they make smaller water droplets. So they're like really just making humidity, I guess. That was one thing. Outdoor, there's this amazing technique I heard about where when you cut the log, you're cutting it into like carryable human-sized pieces of wood. That's what that's what you're going for. And really 8 inches is good, because bigger the log, then the longer it'll retain its moisture. So the fewer times you have to water it in the course of a year, right? So if you have bigger media, same with potted plants. If you have a big pot, it can last a week without you, but small ones are going to dry out in a day sometimes. So bigger logs helps you. And then let's see, I'm losing my train of thought.
How do you test for the moisture?
Oh, right. So the technique that I read about is you cut your log and then cut yourself a sample piece of your log that's yay big, like a small piece of your log. Then what you do is you don't let your logs dry out, because you want to keep them healthy moisture up until the point you inoculate them. So you've cut your tree down, it's going to lay there for about a week or two waiting for you to inoculate it. But you cut a sample piece and then you let that piece dry out. And some people actually even bake it in the oven to do it faster. And so you let that piece dry out. Oh, okay, I forgot to say, you weigh the piece of wood before it dries out. Okay, so then you have your weight of that piece of wood. Then you let the piece of wood totally dry out to 0% moisture, and you know that by baking it in the oven. Dehydrate the piece of wood, then weigh it again. Now you know how much water weight the log had. Then that basically gives you a measuring stick. So then you keep that little piece of wood with your logs year round. It lives in the same place that your mushroom logs live. Then at any given point of the year, you can walk in, grab your measuring stick log, weigh it, and then it sort of represents the whole pile just on the weight. So that's like the best way that I've heard. That was Field and Forest Products.
Okay. I remember you just telling me a few weeks ago, you said moisture, moisture, moisture. So it's just like keep it wet as much as, it's going to be hard for a regular person to check that moisture like that. So just keep the log wet as much as you can. Wouldn't you just water that log or soak it?
Like from what I get, like a professional can pick it up and by the weight knows, is this log dry? Like if it's dry, it weighs 10 pounds less, or whatever. It weighs a lot less when it's dry. So then you have to soak it. I don't really have enough practical experience, but basically Claire, she just kind of, she knows, you know, you kind of just, oh, this one, I'm going to soak this one, you know, and in 3 weeks, I'm going to be eating that one. So it's kind of like gardening. You just kind of
Right.
work it into your mental rotation.
You know when to water and all that, how much and all. Yeah.
I think a lot of it is like experience. Also, you'll know, hey, these logs are sitting kind of in the shade of my elm tree for 2 hours. From 11 a.m. to 1 p.m., they're in the shade. So those stay wet, you know, or those get some of my sprinkler from my tomatoes. So those stay wetter than the ones 10 feet later. Those are always dried out and they never give me mushrooms, you know? So it's kind of like if you have a row of, you know, a row of garlic and you've got a good end of the row and a bad end of the row, right? And so it's the same with mushrooms, I think. So, and that's kind of for the lazy version. For indoor cultivation, they're doing much more precise work, and it's much more simple because they don't want to be wasting their time. I'm more of trying to not waste the tree that I was already cutting down for my landscaping. You know, I'm not building a dedicated room to do my climate controlling, but I might bring 1 or 2 logs into my living space in the winter to see
what
if,
happens.
but they do have, you know, we keep our homes really dry. We keep them about the right temperature for fungus to grow, but we keep it too dry for, intentionally too dry for fungus to grow because we don't want mold growing in our house. But in your garage, it might work because your garage might be a few degrees warmer than what it is outside. So that might extend your mushroom season by like a month, you know. But for me, I'm trying to embrace the winter and actually use it to throw my logs into dormancy, just because my own personal habits. You know, I'm a seasonal grower. I've kind of decided that, you know, I like my seasonality.
So we have a basement.
Mm-hmm.
It's really, unfortunately, moist in the summer. And we struggle with that, you know, with the mold, because we do have to, well, I mean, it gets kind of moldy down there sometimes. Do you think that would be an okay? It's also chilly down there, you know, because it's kind of like a ranch house where the bottom is, and you know, that's like that in Colombia. A lot of the places you've got the top floor, and then you've got the bottom floor with just, it's a built into the basement. You know, it's a walkout basement is what it's called.
Yeah,
And so it gets a little, it's cold, it's chilly, but it can also get a little moldy.
Yeah.
Is that an okay place to try to do that? I mean, it seems like a really ideal temperature and moisture content.
Right. I think, well, the one thing is that if you're adding an organism down there that you want to keep adding more moisture to, it will in the long run, it will probably like add to your mold problem, because it's you're not adding a dehumidifier, you're adding an organism that, a big wet sponge, a big wet piece of wood, you know. But you could treat the basement with I can't remember the name of the chemical, but there's this, it's an antifungal chemical that Paul Allen's treated his whole indoor fungus facility with. And he treated it with that, and then he started cultivating mushrooms. And then he thinks that his beneficial microbes, or his beneficial fungus, has now colonized the basement or his building. And he said,
He's going to have much wall.
yeah, well, he said there's something going on where he doesn't have to, he only had to clean the black mold out like once, and now there's like a different, like there's a new ecosystem happening in
We don't
there.
have bad black mold or anything. Just, I mean, it's just moist.
Yeah, I think in general, it's a really good idea to put it in your basement. The one thing is you might want to build like a tent for it, an enclosure. That way you can still climate control your living space to be 50% humidity. And because really the fungus wants to be like closer to 100% at times, especially when it's fruiting, which is when it's producing food for you. And that's about a 3-week period.
I think basements are common places where people grow mushrooms.
Yeah, but I think the hybrid method where you have like a pallet-sized stack of logs in your backyard, and then you build a fruiting chamber in your basement where you soak the log outside, you have like water outside, and you do that all outside, all the extra water, and you soak them outside and then carry them inside and put them in a fruiting chamber in your basement and then let it grow for 3 weeks. Then you harvest your fungus and then you take the log back outside. That's kind of the hybrid method that I'm trying to do because it saves on space and you're utilizing the outside, which is just anything that can do that is good.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Well, so does anybody want to talk about worms?
Yeah.
I love worms.
Matthew had a really good vermicomposting video that CCUA put on the queue for the Sustainable Living Fair. And I don't know if you, Matthew, why do people want to use worm composting?
Well, I feel like in summary, it's pretty easy to get into. You really just need a bin, some type of like plastic Tupperware or something. You really just need that, some shredded newspaper, some brown grocery bag material ripped up, and then some worms to start off with. Probably getting the right species of worm is maybe the hardest part. It's not your normal earthworm. It's a little bit smaller. It's called a red wiggler. But we actually, at our site over on College, we have a whole compost pile that's just full of them. And so you can, if you want red wigglers, just contact me and you can go there and just dig some up. That's probably the easiest way. And they're pretty cheap online too, to get. But basically, once you get your container, some shredded paper, and your worms in there, start adding your kitchen scraps. And this is a little compost machine that you can basically have it sitting in like in your basement. And it's working during the winter time. It's the worms are active all year round. It produces a more nutritionally dense compost than your normal compost pile outside. And it does a little. You may not be able to throw all your kitchen scraps in there. You kind of have to like, oh, they're still working on that banana peel from a few days ago. I'm going to hold off on that, and maybe throw it outside. But it's just a really cool process to watch because you'll open it up and all the worms will like, oh, there you are, and they'll like kind of squeal, like they'll run back into their little holes, and they just multiply, and so you end up getting like hundreds of worms in this little bin, that just keeps going and going and going, and then over time, over a few months, once it fills up about 2/3 to the top, then it's time to switch it out and start adding more vegetable scraps. So it's just a really neat way you can have a little mobile compost unit, inside.
So there's no, you don't start with any dirt?
You want to put a little bit of like kind of sandy, gritty dirt in there with it, but that's pretty much it. I also like whenever I start it, because the times I've started it, I've used the stuff from the compost pile I mentioned. So I usually like to add some of that compost in there with them because I just feel like, okay, you guys, here's some of your home to go along with you. I don't want to just throw them in there on the paper, but a little gritty material is important because the worms have basically gizzards like a bird. They don't have teeth, and so they rely on little bits of grit in their gut to help grind up the material.
And the premise behind worm composting is it's more nutritious because of the castings and it's quicker.
Yeah, that's kind of the two the two benefits. It's quicker than your composting outside. It's more nutritionally dense, and it's a cool way to do it. You can have it inside, in your basement. If you live in an apartment or something, it's a way you can compost at home too. So
If we have a big compost bin outside, we have one that's about this big, and it is not like actually composting very well, even though we've done everything that I think we're supposed to do. Could we add some worms to that and see if that helps?
yeah, most likely so. Is your compost bin is it in contact with the ground, or is it one of those tumblers up off the ground?
It's in contact with the ground. Yeah, it's one that we
okay.
from the Columbia from the city. Yeah, it's the round.
Oh, great. Oh, right. I've seen the kind of the plastic netting mesh kind of wall around it.
It's
You're
kind
basically
of rubber with holes in it.
right.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, cool. Yeah, probably. Are you adding both, in addition to your kitchen scraps, also adding some sort of, we say, the brown material?
Yeah, we're doing all of them. Yeah, the browns and the greens, and
we're layering and everything, but it just doesn't seem to do anything.
Yeah, I think worms might help. If you think that worms would help, maybe we should go and get some worms and see.
Yeah, totally. And it probably wouldn't be a bad idea to just get a couple scoops full of our compost too, because it's got a lot of activity in it. So you get a bunch of microbes that we've already got in our compost pile. It would probably help kind of jumpstart your pile.
Yeah, good idea. We should do that. Thanks.
Have you ever made tea from the, when you get the compost stuff and then make tea and water your plants and stuff with that? Or
I have no. It sounds cool. I think a couple of my coworkers have. I kind of know the basics, but I haven't done it myself.
Yeah, I haven't done that either, and I've been gardening a long time. I keep saying I'm going to do it, or even just fermenting all your stuff in a bucket too and adding water. That might work as well.
Yeah, true.
Matthew, why do you have to use plastic? I guess so the worms don't escape.
Oh, I guess I think because you just got to drill some holes in it to let air in. And it's an easy material to do that with. I usually use a kind of an opaque bin so it doesn't let any light in, because they like it dark. And over the holes, I've also there was a few fruit flies coming in and out, so I taped up some mesh along those holes, so they're still getting oxygen, but they're not letting any of the little fly guys come in.
How about the smell coming out of one of those bins? Can you smell it easy then?
Yeah. Well, if it has a smell, it should have some smell, kind of just an earthy smell. But if it's starting to smell bad and you open it up, it's probably going to be kind of pretty watery. It's going to look kind of like a swamp in there. And so that means what you probably should do once you see that is kind of tip it to the side and try to scoop out some of the water and just dry it out a little bit. But what I do then is just I monitor what stuff I put in it more closely. Even putting too many apple cores or a watermelon rind is just going to add a lot of water. So if I try to put just drier stuff in there, like my potato peels, for instance, or banana peels, pretty dry, and then kind of going a little bit more careful on the wet stuff. Some people, I haven't done this, but some people do a whole double layer system where you got one bin on top and then another one below it. The one on top has little holes to let the extra water drain out into the bottom one. That's I think called worm leachate. And then they just pour that on their garden. But if you want to avoid doing that and just kind of do the simplest method, then just putting less juicy stuff in there is going to help. Because most of the time the bad smell, I think, comes from some maybe anaerobic bacterial activity. Yeah.
Well, anybody have any questions for anyone? Gail's a stellar gardener. She has a lot of tips, I'm sure, herself.
I like to garden. I'm gardening today.
Gail, what's blooming right now?
Let's see. Oh, nothing in the vegetable garden, but I did see a trout lily at 3 Creeks, and the spring beauties leaves are up. I didn't see any flowers, but they're getting ready. So it's starting to happen. Oh, my spice bushes are starting to get some flowers on them. They're starting to bud out. The maple tree, the red maple, it's flowering.
Our whole
That's-
yard is filled with daffodils right now. It is.
Yeah.
Yeah, these are the most well-established daffodils. I mean, they planted them in the 60s or something. So, I mean, they're like
That's beautiful.
daffodils. Yeah, it's pretty cool.
Well, anything?
Hey, Gail.
Yeah.
I want to try and grow stinging nettle. Where can I get a plant?
I have a bunch growing out in my woods.
Well, Julie, we do have a workshop on native plants starting on Thursday at 7, and it's another Zoom workshop. And so I'm sure that Nadia can tell you where you could get stinging nettle.
A good person. Yep.
But you know, I don't know that answer. Anyone? I mean, it's out in the woods. I hear people talking a lot about it right now. But I'm sure Nadia can. She'd probably give you some if you told her to. Are you in Columbia?
Yeah, I am.
Okay. Yeah, I would check our workshop out on Thursday. It's going to be basically about native wildflowers. But she knows just about everything there is to know about any kind of native plants. So she will be the person to ask.
Okay, great, thanks.
Anyone else? I appreciate you guys coming out and sharing your knowledge, and folks that came out to watch this. And it's been my experience that people for this Sustainable Living Fair, which is brought to you by Mid-Missouri Peaceworks and the Columbia Earth Day Coalition in conjunction with Columbia Center for Urban Agriculture, Missouri Bird Observatory, Missouri River Bird Observatory, River Relief, and Mizzou Agroforestry. And the city of Columbia has assisted us with a lot of different things, and so have the Boone County Stormwater folks. But we have about 13 days of programming, and it's all still available online. So if you haven't checked out any of it yet, a lot of the information that's been shared is really worthwhile, and you can find something of your interest, I'm sure, on any of the days, and they're all laid out on columbiaearthday.org/SLF, and that will give you the lineup, and you can just click on the links and go watch any of the videos that have already happened, and the ones that are in the future will be coming up soon. Like I said, we do have the native plant one on Thursday, and on Saturday we have a lot of different gardening ones. So if you guys are into gardening, that would be a good day to check it out. And appreciate y'all coming. Thanks for your time, Matthew and Marley. And if anybody does have any questions for these guys that they think of later, if you just message us at Mid-Missouri Peaceworks. You can message coordinator at columbiaearthday.com, or Marley, how can they get a hold of you?
My email is marleymagner@gmail.com.
And Matthew?
Mine is Matthew at columbiaurbanag.org.
So those are some resources we can all use, and appreciate everybody taking the time.
Thank
Yeah,
you
thanks
for
everybody. Thank you, Laura.
Yes, Laura.
Bye, Robin.
Bye.
Gail.
Is that Beth? Bye, Beth. Bye, Marley.
Bye. Good to see you. Yeah, I'll give you guys a log if anyone wants a log. I'll give you one. You can try it.
Cool.
It's not very
Thank you,
exciting.
Marley.
So. All right. Bye.
And bye.